Previously, we saw a selected series of places in which Chazal related to the question of Bitul Torah, outside wisdoms or forms of culture, places where, in fact, more than just learning the text of the Torah or of the Torah, or learning Torah Sheba'al Peh, first orally, obviously, and then later written, are necessary. We saw that. I mess up a lot of time talking about astronomy, but the truth of the matter is that there are a lot of subordinate, or they're called ancillary types of disciplines, which are necessary in order to be able to learn Torah properly. I mean, all kinds of math. I mean, you can't make an eruv. You can't make a sukkah without knowing some basic geometry and some math. A friend of mine, Professor Moshe Kapel at Bar Ilan, satisfactorily cracked Masechet Kinim, and he shows that the whole Masechet Kinim, which is all about what happens if different korbanot, bird korbanot, get mixed up, is based on a very, very sophisticated understanding of probability. And in addition, I mean, you need to be able to implement the Torah in this world, and that requires all kinds of knowledge. It requires physical and biological knowledge when it comes to animals. It requires more than basic arithmetic if you're going to be able to figure out what the relations between something which is permitted, which falls into something which is prohibited, and so on. Figure out shishim versus rove and all these other things. So those were never taken. Those were never questioned that should be part of the curriculum. The fact that there are places in the learning world where these disciplines are considered to be a waste of time is, to me, absolutely. I don't understand it. I really don't understand. But when it comes to, but there are broader areas of general culture, with which Chazal did not really interact. Largely, we're talking about the plastic arts is an issue which we should talk about separately, but like sculpture and stuff like that. But even in terms of academics, there were areas that Chazal didn't really interact with, despite the fact they lived in a Hellenistic world. It's pretty clear, for example, that the rabbis did not really have much of an interaction with Greek philosophy, which was largely the way the pagans, aside from actual Avodah Zarah, the way the people organized their lives intellectually and so on. There were individual rabbis who, in fact, were interested in Chokhmah Yavanit. We saw that in the case of Elisha ben Dama, who was remember he was the nephew of Rabbi Yishmael, and Rabbi Yishmael, he asked Rabbi Yishmael, can I study Chokhmat Yavanit, which is interpreted in many different ways. For our purposes, let's assume that it means higher philosophy, metaphysics, stuff like that. But these people were relatively rare. And there was no sense at the time in ancient times that it was a necessary field to develop. The only exception being when on the rare occasion or not, on those occasions when Greek philosophers or people who were aficionados of Greek philosophy felt that they needed to, or they went and they were aggressively criticizing Jewish belief. So, for example, there is a famous statement in the Pirkei Avot, among other things a person should do is havei shoked lilmod Torah. I think it was Rabbi Lezer ben something. Havei shoked lilmod Torah. You should be diligent in learning Torah. V'dama shetashiv la'apikoros. Know what you should respond to an apikaris. So what's an apikaris? So we know that apikaris today is in common parlance, is anybody who doesn't believe like me. Especially if it's a matter of if it seems a little bit, if you seem to be saying something on the daring side. He's an apikairos, he's an it's become sort of a synonym for heretic. However,
I thought it did mean heretic.
what?
I thought it did translate as heretic.
It does not translate as heretic. It later became used for heretic, and not fairly quickly. I mean, it became translated as heretic in Talmudic times. But originally, the word epikureus meant an Epicurean.
Is that the guy who said eat, drink, be merry?
Yes, and there's a reason for it. Okay. First of all, why not be eat, drink, and be merry? What could be bad? I mean, especially Jews like to. I don't know about drinking, but Jews like to eat. So what's the big deal? Especially now, you go on. I'm not going to mention names, but I'm stunned by, and actually a little bit. I don't know. I guess I'm too. I'm not that. I'm just not that cultured. I can't get into this. We can have kosher food, and we can sit there and clear our palates with this and this, and have this, and have fine dining, and yeah, but I mean, but they're all these glad kosher foodie groups, and I like that's what you spend your time on. But we'll put that aside. Put that aside because many members of my family are saying, oh, we can go to this restaurant and then we'll have this and that. I like to eat too, but it's and I like good food, but there's a limit. There are on Instagram there are very high level people who live in New York and in Boca Raton and all kinds of other places where they show you we can have this and we can have that and this restaurant and that restaurant and anyway, that's not what we're talking about. There's a reason why the word Epicurean, that's called Epicurean. Sort of enjoying the eat, drink, and be merry. But as long as you're eating, you might as well really enjoy it. The word, but there's a reason why the word Epicurean goes with that, and it's important to know it because it actually relates to what we're doing. One of the major issues that preoccupied the pre-Socratics. Now, Greek philosophy starts really with Socrates, or perhaps with Socrates' most famous student, Plato. But then before him were the pre-Socratics. Many of them didn't actually live in Greece. They lived actually on the western coast of Asia Minor, of what's today Turkey, which were basically where we're located, and not a few Greek cities. One of the issues that the earliest Greek thinkers thought about was the structure and the nature of the world. What is the world made of, and how is it created, and how does it function, and all kinds of things. We don't have a lot of information about them. We know, for example, there was a thinker whose name is Thales who thought that the world was fundamentally water. And you have Heraclitus, who thought that the world was fundamentally fire, and he was the one who, the Sturm und Drang of fire was the underlying material from which the world was created, the underlying dynamic from which the world was created, and so on. So one of these pre-Socratics, his name was Democritus, and Democritus came up with the idea that the world is made up of exquisitely small particles which zoom around. He's the first atomist. I mean, he came up with an idea of atomic theory, that the world is made up of all kinds of these little basic building blocks that you can't see, and they go banging into each other, and from their banging into each other, you end up getting whatever you have in front of you. However, since Democritus did not know about gravitational fields and fields of energy and all of the various rules that end up determining how it is that certain molecules and atoms meet and others don't, and why life emerges from some and not from others, and so on. So he thought it was all happenstance. It's the fact that the atoms that make up me at the moment was just just by accident. It was just by chance, and the same molecules or atoms that make me up now, for the same money, it could have been a chair, or I could have been a Stender, or I could have been a bottle of Pepsi Max, or whatever the case, or Pepsi Zero, whatever the case might be. So there, in other words, since everything is basically based on chance, his conclusion was that therefore there is no larger moral law that obligates you or that guides you. Everything just happens the way it happens. So if I kill you, so what? It was just a blind. It was blind fate, and when you have blind fate, you can't really have moral responsibility. His major student was Epicurus. Okay. And Epicurus was the one who said, "Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die," which is basically, it happens to be at the moment that I'm a person, so I might as well enjoy myself because the next thing I know, I'll die and I'll be a chair or I'll become a giraffe or whatever the case might be. There's a certain element to that. Right, and also the circle of life. I mean, even though there is a little bit more, there's a little more regularity than there is in what I'm describing, but nevertheless, this idea that there is no moral order that becomes translated into Hebrew in the expression "let din v'let dayan." There's no law, there's no judge, there's no nothing. You just sort of go with the flow.
I mean, read that as fundamentally.
That's fundamentally the opposite, because we believe we'll see later on that there is you find out there is a difference of opinion as to the existence of natural law among in the world. On the one hand, there's Maimonides, who represents one school. I mean, it precedes him and predates him, that God created natural law, and that God basically guides natural law. He created and runs according to certain rules and so on. Whereas the Ramban, on the other hand, who said no, that God wills that everything should run the way it does in every single second, as it is. He likes regularity. So, but there's nothing independent of God's immediate will.
Can you really call those two answers mutually exclusive?
No, they aren't. And in fact, they both try to.
What's the big nafkamina?
The nafkamina is how do miracles work? According to Maimonides, he has to pre-program the miracles into nature because God doesn't intervene with nature. The Ramban says no. For 5 seconds, God will suspend wanting things to go a certain way and not go another way. The question is not so much is the ramifications in terms of there were ramifications in terms of prayer. There were ramifications in terms of how does God guide us in our daily lives? Does it work through nature? Is there no nature? That's not for right this second. But however you cut it, that your Epicurean or Democritan theory doesn't allow for divine guidance or divine intervention. It's just blind fate. What?
But isn't like half theory isn't like it's kind of true, like the little molecules or parts.
The atomic theory was...
The atomic theory assumes the presence of the atomic theory assumes that there were all kinds of all the electrical valences of atoms and the gravitational fields and stuff like that guide the way that the atoms interact.
Didn't you say...
So just had like the idea of like the little...
This is just people just messing around and bumping into each other and end up becoming a chair.
Wait, but didn't you say these guys were Greek?
They're Greek, so.
I mean, that kind of works with the Greek belief, but then it also doesn't. That's not to say in Greek mythology there's not gods coming down.
So what you do is you end up interpreting Greek mythology as representing these stories. You can interpret stories however you want.
Right, so their belief
By the way, this goes against Aristotle, goes against Plato. There's no question. I mean, but this was a theory that was developed before Socrates, before Plato, and continued to exist. I'm not an Aristotelian. I'm a Democritan, or I'm an Epicurean. And so why am I telling you this? Because at the time that I still remember the name. It was Rebbe Elazar ben something. Mentioned that Mishnah. There was an upsurge in interest in Epicurean philosophy and thought among pagans in Israel. All right? I mean, it just happened that there were. I mean, that's the case. So that at that point, it was necessary to learn to master Epicurean philosophy sufficiently to be able to rebut it. That's not much to touch about, because in other words, my point here is that there is a reactive, defensive element in the mandate that was expressed by one of the Tanaim to know how to respond to an epikari. So it's not a question, go get a PhD in general philosophy, but rather because this is an aggressive form of thought which people have to deal with, because the people who represented it are advanced Epicurean beliefs. And it seemed to make sense. So there was a need to respond and to know how to rebut it and to defend Jewish ideas in the face of that, in the face of those claims. Yeah.
Then why is it that you have like a lot of rebellion that use kind in history? I think but this idea of like retreating the shtetl and avoiding.
The Beseder. So most people, unless you had to deal with it, you didn't have to bother with it.
Fine.
Okay. And in fact, that's my point. My point is that Professor Lieberman and others pointed out that there was very little high-level engagement or encounter on the part of Jews in the land of Israel in the Hellenistic age with high-level or with advanced Greek philosophy, with this one exception. And the one exception was engendered a defensive requirement to respond to ideas which were maybe they were making headway in certain circles, and so learn how to respond to defend Judaism. But aside from that, if you don't have to, don't. Okay, which is an approach, by the way, that we're going to encounter. We're going to encounter a lot. In the case you mentioned, Rav Shamshon Farley here, so we're going to see it in the 10th century already in Baghdad. He was dealing with a situation in which Enlightenment philosophy and thought and ideas came and provided political advantages for Jews who got involved with it. But classical liberalism posed intellectual and social challenges to Judaism, and therefore Rav Shamshon Farley Hirsch's position, from his point of view, required our mastering them to be able to respond, because many people were chucking the Torah out the window because they didn't have the tools to be able to say, well, maybe first of all, the philosophy that's being presented to me as an alternative to the Torah is not as perfect and not as watertight and ironclad as it looks, or maybe it's possible to make some kind of a modus vivendi with it and so on. Yeah.
Do we know what form Chaim actually had access to this kind of the issues they're dealing with, or are they kind of just basing it off? This is what the people around us who we're dealing with say they believe in.
No, we know of encounters between certain of the Tanaim and the Moraim who encountered in Tveria or in Caesarea or places that were significant cultural centers in the land of Israel, and they ended up either they met them by accident or they was let's put it this way. Say I live in Sipori. Okay. Sipori is a lovely town up in the Galil. It's a town that was divided third Jew, shlish and shlish. It was a third Jews, a third Christians, and third pagans. And you meet guys in the market. What are you going to talk about? The weather is not that interesting. Politics you don't get to. There's no sports. So you talk religion, especially or you talk about the market or money, whatever. But if you're an intellectual, then that's what you and people who are committed Aristotelians or Platonists or whatever, there is a certain it's hard to call this missionizing, but there is a certain outgoingness or there's a sense of this inner sense of need to share or convince others of the truth. If you have the truth, you'll always want to not keep it to yourself. So these types of encounters happen. They didn't happen all across the board, and they weren't extensive. They became much more common when Christianity became to missionize. But that's not our issue at the not our issue at the moment.
There wasn't writings per se that they encountered as much as.
That would require the question is that would require us answering the question: to what degree were the Jews in the land of Israel Hellenistically literate. It's hard to tell. There were Jews. There were certain. Okay, there were Jews who knew how to read. There were Jews who knew how to read and write Greek, but there was, in general, the impact of Hellenistic culture on the rabbis was overwhelmingly in the area of practice and materialism. In other words, you have zillions of Greek words certainly in the Talmud Yerushalmi and the Midrashim, because people spoke Greek, because that's the language that the non-Jews spoke. You have a lot of impact on material culture, because the world that you lived in was developed and built and maintained by Hellenistic types, and so that was all over the place. However, that's not the same as having advanced. How much? I mean, the average Haredi guy, okay, speaks Hebrew. That doesn't mean he read, Amos Oz, right? I'd say they're two different. They don't necessarily go together. All right, now, the first time that you really, really, really get a meeting of or an encounter or a challenge, a high-level challenge. On the side from a philosophical point of view, vis-a-vis a Jewish population where the Jews can't avoid addressing the intellectual challenges that are involved, and we'll get to that, is after the Arab conquest. So after the Arab conquest. Let me give you the background, the historical background, because it's going to sound. Once I lay it out, you'll see it's going to sound not unfamiliar in terms of contemporary circumstances. Okay, in 632, we talked about this the other day. 632, Muhammad dies, or he was killed by a Jew, his Jewish wife, depending on who you ask. Muhammad dies, and the forces of Islam burst out of the Arabian Peninsula, and within 100 years, they conquer an empire that we saw went from southern France all the way to Afghanistan. For our purposes, as a result of that, number one, the overwhelming majority of Jews in the world find themselves under the rule of one government. Okay? Because the overwhelming majority of Jews lived in Egypt, North Africa, Eretz Israel, Syria, Babylonia, and Persia. Okay, that's number one. Number two, one of the cities that they conquer relatively early on in their conquests is the city of Haran, which is in northern Syria. The same Haran from which Avram Avinu left to come to Eretz Israel, or which actually Terach apparently left Ur Kasdim to go live. What's the big deal, Haran? Haran was a major intellectual center in the eras before the Arab conquest. In Haran, now who was ruling there before? The Byzantine Christians. Actually, before that, Haran was a major pagan intellectual center, and then with the rise of Christianity and the Eastern Roman Empire becoming Christian, so the intellectual heritage of the ancient world was then, from then on, preserved by Christian monks, by Byzantine Orthodox monks. Yes.
Something might be incredibly wrong with my history there, but surely the Greeks would have been and gone at that point.
I'm sorry?
Surely the Greeks would have been and gone.
I don't mean Greeks in the sense of Alexander. I mean people that lived in the Hellenistic, look at when the world, most of the Eastern Empire was pagan, and with a Hellenistic sort of patina.
Fine, but surely.
Hold on, and then in the 4th century, first with the Edict of Milan, and then with the actions of Theodosius I. The Eastern Empire, or the rest of the empire, becomes Christian, officially. The subsequent Roman emperors, or Byzantine emperors, that's in the East, undertake a campaign to upend and eliminate paganism and convert the entire Eastern Empire to Christianity. Over that time, they closed the academies, and they closed it's a long process, but they closed the academies, they closed the pagan temples. The games stopped being most of the games stopped being observed in the various stadia and colossia. And slowly but surely the area becomes Christian. The monasteries the monasteries that are set up in the Eastern Empire are generally Byzantine monasticism is a little different than what you know from the West, but you have places where the monks work together and they preserve. One of the things they take upon themselves is to preserve the heritage of the ancient world. All of the writings of the great scientists and philosophers of the ancient world are preserved, are translated, copied, and preserved by Christian monks. What they do in the East is to translate the works of the great all the works of the great philosophers and thinkers and historians and so on, from Greek into Aramaic, or Syriac, which is Christian Aramaic, into Aramaic, and they're preserved there. Look at where does in the West the same thing happens. In the West, the same thing happens. During what's called the Dark Ages, the great works of the ancients are preserved in the monasteries. I mean, many of these monks don't know what they're copying, but they're copying them and they're preserving them. And when things settle down and the time comes for in the West for what's called the 12th century, Renaissance of the 12th century, all the books are there, and that leads to the effervescence of scholarship and Christian scholasticism and all kinds of stuff. Anyways, so in Haran, the great Christian monks preserve the great works of the past because they respect wisdom, and Haran is conquered by the Muslims. Learned Muslims come across this material, and they are stunned by it because the writings of Plato and the Neoplatonists and Aristotle and those who follow him are very convincing. They're very sophisticated. They teach biology and chemistry and physics, and not just theology, not just philosophy rather, and history and all kinds of other things. And the truth of the matter is, they are highly sophisticated and very convincing. If you've ever, what's the first book that you study when you study Greek philosophy? Is Logic. And all of Aristotle's works, for example, are based on his own systems of logic. And learned Muslims become very enamored and convinced by the wisdom of the ancients. Okay, now, yes.
Don't some, and certainly in Maimonides' case it's true, but don't some people in this world kind of end up reading translated texts like what they proclaim to be? So that, the most famous one that comes to mind is the Theology of Aristotle or something like that.
Yeah, well, okay. There's a lot of pseudepigraphic stuff. There's a lot of stuff that goes under the name of Aristotle and Plato, and that's not. But all right, so fine, yes, and that becomes part of their canon. But in terms of substance, or in terms of modes of thinking and stuff like that, it's all part of a piece. And you can accept this or not accept that. Okay, all right. So in other words, there grows up an elite of Muslim scholars who becomes convinced of the veracity and the substantive nature of the writings of the Greeks. Okay? Because they're convincing. Now, that raises issues. Now, it doesn't mean that that's true of all Muslim scholars. Plenty of Muslim scholars thought, this is Greek, this is pagan, I want no part of it. So I'm not saying this is everybody, okay? But it's very sophisticated, very attractive, and if you can, a person that can speak in a highly cosmopolitan philosophical way, it's a very impressive achievement to be able to do that. Now, which requires us to go into the question, get a little bit into the question of epistemology, and we don't have. Is there? Let me see if there's. Let me see if there's a. No. Okay. No, it's okay. I just. For our purposes, the encounter of Muslim religious intellectuals with the writings of the Greeks required them to address fundamental elements in epistemology. Let me explain what that means. Epistemology means what? Sources of knowledge. Okay. According to Aristotle, there are three sources of knowledge. There is the testimony of the senses, okay, especially the eyes and the ears, but not only. All right. A priori logical propositions, and the conclusions then one would arrive, at which one would arrive by combining the first two. Well, that's logic. By logically combining, comparing, and contrasting what appears to be to some senses, or what logically would appear to be true a priori, and you sort of, whatever. Okay. Now, that system led Aristotle, for example, to be of the opinion that on the one hand, there is a godlike reality which moves the universe. He called it the unmoved mover. Okay, right? Why is that? Because he says, look, he says everything that happens has a cause. Something moves. Something moved it. But the thing that moved it. But you can't. But there's no such thing as an infinite regression, infinite causation. It still has to start somewhere, and he called that the unmoved mover.
Yeah, that's just speaking God into existence.
Okay,
Is that what they define God as?
Yeah. Okay. So all right. So that right. So in other words. But one could find a God like something in Aristotle. Okay. On the other hand, that God-like something or being or unmoved mover, does not really know or cannot really know what else is going on, like way down the line, wherever the unmoved mover is. So the question of divine providence or hashgacha pratit becomes a problem. And Aristotle saw Aristotle was the person who advanced the idea that the world was not created, because he based himself on observation. And as far as I see, the world has always worked the way it does, and there's no other reason, okay, to assume otherwise. So in other words, but the Muslims come and they have a revelation from they believe that was given by God, they believe that was given by Allah, and the revelation teaches otherwise. Yes, there is a God, there's Allah. However, Allah knows everything that you do. He's a personal God, and he created the world. On the other hand, Aristotle has all kinds of logical proofs that the world wasn't created, the world was always the way it was. Why is that a problem? Because truth, by definition, is indivisible. You can only have one truth. It can't be both true and not true. So the world cannot be created and not created. God cannot know and not know what's going on in the world. Similarly, okay, however he would have defined it, God, the unmoved mover, is not physical, according to Aristotle. It's something, energy, I don't know what you call it, okay? Whereas in the Quran, God is got a hand and legs and his mouth and he's screaming and yelling and I mean, you know, God is portrayed physically. Now, how is that possible? Because if you prove something logically, it must be true. But revelation, you believe more from the get-go is absolutely true because it comes directly from Allah. So there become essential tensions between the two sources of truth, revelation and philosophy. Yeah.
It's kind of like possible like for that there is like beyond all in the sense of
That will later become a solution. But right now I'm laying out the problem. You just gave me one of the solutions. The solution you gave me is basically Rabbi Yehuda Levi. Yeah.
I'd argue that with philosophy, you set your own bounds to how you can reason. If you're going to work within the bounds of religion, you then need to kind of not adjust the rules you play by, but there are certain assumptions. Like it's like maths, they're axioms. Sometimes you would use certain axioms, sometimes you wouldn't. Depending on the situation you're trying to reason within.
But you're talking about you're taking from a modern philosophical point of view. The rules were taken then to be a lot more
so you're saying
rigid.
The rules then were absolute, but that also removes philosophy from religion. You're saying
No, but it can't be. How can it be? No, but that's the whole point. You can't. Since there's only one God, and there's only one truth. And there's truth which can be arrived at by logic and by study and by science. And there's truth that arrived through religion or through revelation. And they both have to be the same truth because God doesn't give two truths because he can't have two truths. So you're faced with a real conundrum. That's their conundrum. Okay? Exactly. No. So that's the point. There can only be one truth. There can only be one truth. So these students of these profoundly religious Muslim scholars were faced with a serious conundrum. What did they do? So what they do is they say, look. So first of all, point of departure is A, revelation, the Quran, and what the Greeks have shown us to be true logically can't contradict. Number one. Number two, we have to find a way to be able to square the circle, or at least to resolve the contradictions. In general, and this is going to be true of Muslim philosophy and Jewish philosophy and Christian scholastic philosophy, on a point-by-point basis, on the question of creation, which goes with the question of providence and so on, all philosophers will work on the assumption and will work to show that Aristotle did not unilaterally and convincingly prove that the world could not have been created. And therefore, we can accept, since I've weakened the argument, in Aristotle, I can accept the determination of revelation that the world was created, and that allows for miracles, and that allows for interventions, and that allows for God to talk, and stuff like that. Okay, that's
Aristotle reasoned that the world was created.
so we can go through. I mean, I'm not going to go through it, but take a look. Take a look for there's an entire literature proving the creation of the world using the tools of Greek philosophy. Maimonides in the second section of Rambam in the second section of the guide. The whole second part of the guide is devoted to the question, or it's the other way. I forgot what. First half is prophecy. Second half is creation.
Right, the other thing is, again, I'm still thinking about this from a mathematical perspective, but do philosophers need to state their assumptions, so to speak, at the beginning?
I'm sorry?
Does a philosopher, when they're going to try to reason something, do they need to state the assumptions they're going to make? Or
Yeah. It's very open. It's very intellectually honest. This is not dogmatic. I don't accept this.
Fine, so surely you can just say, I don't hold by some of your...
No, you have to because if you have a cogent argument that's made by the greatest philosopher who ever lived, that the world wasn't created, that it was always steady state, you have to engage his arguments and upend them or show that they're not necessary.
Then what's the first principles of philosophy in this case? Because you can't just prove something from nothing. We have to have a couple things. That
You look at the world the way it is. I mean, you take a look that there were.
Right, so it's anything that you can like touch and feel is.
Right, and so you take a look. You say, I mean, the most accessible for you is take a look at the way that Sadia and Emunot Vodayot deals with creation, or Rambam in the second part of the Moreh Nevuchim. Those are the standard answers. And and the Rambam says, look, Rambam's point ultimately is that there is nothing compelling, there's nothing absolutely compelling about Aristotle's argument for steady state, and it's a matter of debate among the philosophers. And since you have an absolute unilateral and uncompromising position on the part of the Torah, in this case, that the world was created, so you go with the assertion of it's like a Bari V'Shem a Bari Yadav kind of thing.
It's funny how much more willing to compromise they are on anthropomorphism.
So but that's not such a problem. So that's as far as creation is concerned. On the other hand, when it comes to anthropomorphism, to the description of God, or anthropopathism, the description of God as having a body or having human emotions, the arguments in favor of a non-corporeal and non-material God were far more compelling, were incredibly compelling. And as a result, starting with the earliest philosophers, they said, look you don't have to take everything literally. You can allegorize. When the Quran or the Bible or the New Testament describe God in human terms, the integrity of revelation is not impugned if you say that in this case the Bible or the Quran or the New Testament are using literary images to get a point across to a not so sophisticated audience, when in fact it didn't mean to be taken seriously. That God in Himself is not corporeal, cannot be corporeal, because one of the arguments that's made is the fact that bodies change. And God can't be changeable, because that would mean that previously there was some kind of imperfection within God, and that's not something which is that contradicts the nature of the definition of God. Okay, all right. So that was largely that was what the first Muslim scholars did in order to be able to integrate what they were convinced were the two major sources of knowledge together. Initially for them too, it was sort of something of an apologetic, not apologetic in the sense of apologize, I'm wrong, but in the sense of defensive mode, to be able to show that God's revelation is perfectly compatible with the finest that science has to offer. Okay, because otherwise. What was the fear? The fear was it said, look at what happens today. We worship the scientists and say, the Bible's whatever. Plenty. You haven't heard people say that. Okay. Yeah, Christopher. I mean, most of them come from Hitchens and Dawkins and all these other Marimbichen,
They treat it like a religion.
Yeah, no, but I was going to say there's not too much of a difference between a scientific approach to the universe and a logical approach like Aristotle.
All right, so you're having the same thing. So what was the fear? So the fear was that to not engage in this would lead to the undermining of faith on the part of other people. Especially the less sophisticated the person is, the more you're going to have a problem. All right, so that's number one. Number two, and it goes hand in hand. These same. Once they accomplished this, so this starts in the 8th century, 9th century, whatever, the Muslim scholars realized that, first of all, that there is that having a religion which can be proven with the tools of reason, because once you overcome the areas of conflict, or of apparent conflict, you can use philosophy to show that Islam is much more sophisticated and much more advanced and much deeper than people had previously thought. So that strengthens faith. That was the argument. And it can be used as a tool to convert everybody else. How so? Very simple. They, to their satisfaction, now first of all, they're ruling the world. And as I told you 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, that it's true that those who had a monotheistic, were members of a monotheistic faith, which predated Islam, were allowed to continue living under that faith as long as they were in tremendously reduced and reduced circumstances, politically, socially, and economically, whereas pagans weren't allowed to. Pagans weren't allowed. We're not allowed to live. Nevertheless, that's not where it ended. That's not where it ended. Now, the fact that there was this idea of al kitab, that people of the book were allowed to continue living and can't be forced into joining Islam, that's true. But that didn't take away the missionary impulse on the part of the Muslims to convert everybody, because they have to. They have to. Now, if you were a Muslim, you would have to. If you were a Christian, you would have to. Missionizing is built into both religions. Because you have the truth, you have the message, whether it's from Allah, from Muhammad, or from Jesus, whatever it is, and you must share it.
Salvation doesn't come in any other way.
Right. As I said, Augustine said, "Extra ecclesiam nullus is salus." There's no salvation outside of the church. The same thing as no salvation outside of the mosque. So yes, I'm not going to put a gun to your head and force you, because there's no compulsion in religion. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to try to do everything I possibly can to get other people, convince them to convert. So I will apply what's called in Hebrew lachatz lo matun, lachatz matun or lachatz lo matun, moderate or not so moderate pressure, which could be the reduced circumstances in which non-Muslims are living. Like, what do I need this for? I might as well convert. Or, I'll propagandize. And I'll say, look, there's only one truth. There's only one truth. Since there's only one truth, but there are two ways to that truth. You all agree with that. Okay? Since you all agree with that, we have already shown that it is possible to synthesize Greek wisdom, philosophy, science with religion, and religion emerges all stronger for it. Let's see you do it. Prove to us that your religion can do the same. If you can't, it means that your religion doesn't line up with one of the sources of truth, which comes from God, and therefore your religion is deficient. And if your religion is deficient, it is wrong. Now, whether you use that to be able to force people to convert, or you use that to be able to undermine people's faith so they'll convert on their own, is irrelevant. So in other words, there's an external challenge that is being posed. There's an external challenge which is being posed to the Christians and Jews and Zoroastrians. Show us. So the Jews, whereas they on their own did not, were not attracted or did not get involved with this kind of study, now they have to respond out of self-defense.
Is there a level of internal self-defense as well?
Oh, so that's the thing. So then they quickly discover that once you've done this, you also get tools to defend yourself from doubts that might arise inside, and to defend your religion, and so on and so forth. But it is initially a response to an external challenge. All right? That apologetic dynamic is a permanent moment, and raises all kinds of problems, is a permanent moment in the interaction between the Torah and anything that comes up from the outside world. If the world doesn't bother us, we're very happy to just, sit, learn Chumash and Gemara and leave us alone. When the world forces itself on you, You have no choice but to respond. First of all, you absorb ideas and values from the outside that don't sit well with what you're doing. You need to develop the tools to critically evaluate that which you now believe or that which you're now exposed to. And you have to and then you have to develop the strategies to respond. And that is true of every single thing that's popped up, whether it's Christianity or whether it's postmodernism or whether it's classical liberalism or whether it's feminism or whether it's communism, whatever the case might be. Okay? And sometimes it comes to, I'm just going to, and the types of response that you have are they're almost always the same. Either I'm going to give in, or I'm going to batten down the hatches, or I'm going to do something in the middle. Try to see that they're compatible, say judiciously accept this and not that, see if I can perceive within my own tradition something that they're claiming is on the outside. And all those variations, they start and they change form depending on where the challenge is coming from. Do you understand the point? Okay. One of the I'm going to what's the word? I'm going to sort of yes, I'll polemicize. Part of the sad part of the Haredi, it's modern Orthodox also. One of the tragic part of the tragedy of the modern Orthodox world is the fact that since the demise of the students of Rabbi Soloveitchik, and I'm sorry to say this, but Rabbi Sachs did not address these issues head on. The modern Orthodox community has not developed anybody or any group of people to do this kind of work on its behalf. The Haredim, and as a result, you see much of the liberal Orthodox community basically just tries to take the Torah and try to adjust it as much as possible to whatever the common bon toms are. What?
We're the ones playing catch up.
Correct. But that ends up puts you at a terrible disadvantage. You're on the back foot. The Haredim thought that they could solve the problem, starting with the Chassam Sofer in the 19th century, by battening down the hatches and separating themselves from the rest of the Jewish world. We'll have our own newspapers, we'll have our own this, have our own that, have the other thing. And that worked for a certain amount of time. Even forget about the Israeli issue in terms of contributing in the army and in the economy and stuff like that. That is no longer viable. It's no longer a viable model for the simple reason that because of the internet and smartphones, the world forces itself on the Haredi world, eats away at its edges. And they don't know how to. They don't have the tools either to know how to engage. And it was sort of like face-to-face kind of engagement that these Muslims did first, and then Jewish philosophers did afterwards. Doesn't exist, and so you have all kinds of phenomena like Haredi Maranos, where they go through either they lose their faith and leave, or they sort of go underground. They go through the motions because they don't want to give up their families and stuff like that. But they're sort of eaten away by skepticism and so on and so forth and everything in between. These dynamics are that I've described from the 9th century are there's nothing. It just keeps repeating itself. We're not going to be able to do it now. What I want to do next time is I want to read to you this passage from this number 5 about these kind of public debates that took place in Baghdad between Muslim, Jewish, Christian, and Zoroastrian intellectuals that created the atmosphere for the need to engage this kind of thing, and then see how classical Jewish thinkers responded. That will lead into a whole question. You will see that morphs into major issues about the interpretation of halacha, the definition of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Rambam, for example, is going to say that learning getting a regular general education is part of Talmud Torah. But that may depend on how you define Talmud Torah. See, it's going to be very not in terms of how do you define Talmud Torah in terms of what you study. So it's by itself going to be an issue. It's not going to the medieval situation is not going to line up exactly with ours, for the simple reason that one of the differences between the world that we're describing now and the world in which we live is that. One of the things that classical Greek philosophy and revealed religion have in common is that they both maintain the idea that there are absolute truths that can be known.
I'm sorry, like, what's like the end goal of like actually like making these interactions? And it's just gonna lead to like, I don't see like, where's the general progress to be made?
I understand.
No, because you're saying that like, oh, like we'll see how like these these modern Jewish thinkers can like address these like.
We don't have any.
No, I'm just saying.
I mean, what's the end game? The end game is a few things. First of all, there are those who, and we'll have to discuss this as well. There are those who believe, like Rav Soloveitchik and Rav Lichtenstein and Rav Shamshon Karol Hirsch and others, who thought that outside that being part of the broader world is part of the Jewish mandate. The Rav used to talk about the fact that Gever Toshav Anochi Imachem, that I'm both a resident and a stranger among you, but I'm also a resident, and that taking things from the outside world can enhance our worship of God and our life of mitzvot. Certainly, philosophy, psychology is a discipline that has been tremendously helpful in terms of broad areas of halacha. That's one issue. But the difference is that here, these people believed in absolute truth. So did Aristotle, so did Moshe Rabbeinu, so did Muhammad, so did whatever. Right? What we're encountering is a skeptical world where there is no belief in anything hard and fast, where everything is fluid. One of the things that Marxism teaches is that everything is fluid. Marx has famously said, "All that is solid melts into the air," and that makes things a lot. Things a lot trickier. But
That's been in direct relation to like other religions.
Like why engage?
No, not why.
no, our issue is not other religions in that regard. In other words, one of the reasons why I can understand and appreciate Islam, even though it might be deadly as far as my personal life is concerned, is they believe in absolute truth, and I understand exactly how they function. Same thing with classical Christians. Contemporary Protestants know because they've become very relativist. They basically the mainline Protestant churches have adopted a lot of this sort of like anthropocentric, relativist, subjective kind of religiosity, which basically is whatever's good for you. That's fine. There's no issue of sacrifice involved or anything like that. You don't fight for it because it's not. By the way, it's not surprising. It's very interesting. I don't know if you guys, the Brits among you, know this or not, that there is a stunning move on the part of nominally Anglican Brits to Catholicism. It's really very, very stunning. Because what?
The Church of England is
Church of England. Church of England is
Yeah,
fundamentally postmodern.
Yeah.
And the churches are empty, and there's been a significant uptick of conversions to Catholicism.
Yeah, I mean, they had, obviously it was never going to be realistic. They had a woman in the running for their church.
Okay, but that's a symptom, not a cause. What the people are looking for is something which is firm and presents absolute beliefs. And
Christianity is not always, but modern day Christianity, what I've always been known and surrounded by, it's weak. It's not. The mandate isn't something you live by. It's just something. It's a little bit of salt on top of the seasoning.
No, but that's only post World War II.
Exactly.
It's only post World War II. Post World War II is part of liberation theology and all kinds of other things. That's what ended up happening. And as a result, the churches are empty.
Fine. But I mean, that's not to say that even church in Italy, I forgot his name. Catholic Church. The Catholic Church. They're also saying that like we need to change ourselves and compromise. So.
That and yet on certain basic rules, on certain basic issues, they're not moving. Even this Pope was an American. He said no women deacons, no women priests. He's not moving anywhere on abortion. And I should add, by the way, that my impression, again, this is only from, it's not scientific. This is from TikTok and Instagram. But my impression is that people who are moving from Protestantism to Catholicism are attracted to the traditionalist wings of the Catholic Church and not the more liberal wings of the Catholic Church. Now, I asked a friend of mine who was the former head of one of the major research institutes of the church research institutes, the Acton Institute. If I'm reading like a reading from TikTok and Instagram is not the most scientific way of going about this. He's a little bit more skeptical, but there's no question. You have to ask yourself another question: Protestants converting to Islam. Islam is the fastest growing religion in Europe, but not just because they're having more babies.
Yeah.
It's because what? They convert.
Oh, to be fair.
It offers solidity.
No, but so I understand with engaging with like modern values and ideals and like science, whatever. But I'm just asking, like, why would we need to engage with like their own values?
I'm sorry, what?
Like, I understand like engaging in like modern, in modern knowledge and like contemporary science and like so forth, and like being able to be integrated into the modern society. But what's like the goal within like interacting with like specifically for on the religious side of things?
Like debating philosophy.
No, I'm talking about like other religions. Yeah.
But they have the same problem. The challenge
I'm not
of
talking about Judaism. I'm talking about like Islam and like.
because people live in a world and they're told that this joke. Then people are being people are being told that that nothing is firm and nothing is absolute and that what?
But nobody, someone who's adherent to Islam would obviously agree that there is firm truth. It's just not your firm truth. Like, why would we want to engage with them?
Because they challenge. Why would we want to engage with them?
Yeah.
No, we don't. The challenge to us is secularism and postmodern relativism.
Oh, okay. So like, it's not. So that's where I was like.
No. So in other words, right now, the religion that we're dealing that Judaism has to deal with most is the secular, dogmatic, humanist, relativist, amoral, culture of the West.
Yeah.
There's a certain amount. There's a certain amount of. There are Jews who convert to Islam and Jews that convert to Christianity, but to a certain degree, they do that because they don't know anything about Judaism. I mean, they're searching for something, and Christianity sounds solid, and Islam sounds solid. I mean, so therefore they'll go with that. But that's our biggest challenge is not from the other monotheistic faiths at the moment, except for the fact that the Muslims want to, there's a broad wave of, I'm not saying every Muslim, the broad wave of Muslims that would like to see Israel destroy, the Jews turned back into dhimmi, and the caliphate realized. But that's actually great. We can grasp that. I can understand that. I mean, that's something I can understand. Okay, I mean, imagine that, so we don't believe that there are any Amalekites around, but it works within our sort of purview. You follow?
I do. I understand that like groups claim that people are attracted to an absolute truth, but I just don't see
So let's lay out our absolute
how
truth.
that's what.
So let's lay out ours and why it's